Greetings folks and welcome to another 8/16/32-bit. I'm your host Rob, and today we're looking at something which was quite important and somewhat seminal for those of us who grew up during the 8-bit era in the UK, and that is the time period known as the Covertape Wars. Now, let's get a little bit of history in here so people understand what we're talking about. In the 1980s, the home computer market in the UK was very healthy indeed. You had the Spectrum, the Commodore 64, the Amstrad CPC, and to a lesser extent you had machines such as the BBC, the Dragon 32, etc. And one thing that was common across pretty much all of these was the prevalence of dedicated magazines. There were some multi-format magazines, but predominantly people seem to gravitate towards specific magazines for their system. And of course, the more popular the system, the more magazines there were. Now, the Covertape Wars did affect the big three formats, the CPC, the C64 and the ZX Spectrum. But I'm going to concentrate on the ZX Spectrum here because that was the one I had first-hand experience of at the time. So, as a ZX Spectrum owner, there were three main magazines that I had a choice of by the late 1980s. Crash, Sinclair User, and Your Sinclair. Now, each of these fought for market share. You, as a publisher, wanted your magazine to be the biggest seller, so they did whatever it took to outdo each other. Now, various things were tried at various times by magazines, exclusive articles, exclusive reviews of games, freebies taped to the front. But the one that stuck, that started in the late 80s, was a cover tape. Now, what is a cover tape? Well, quite simply, it is a tape which was affixed to the cover of the magazine, hence the name cover tape, that contained some software usually. Often it started off as a demo level or two of an upcoming title and maybe some pokes that you could preload in without having to type them out, even music on occasion, as Your Sinclair infamously did place a song on their cover tape one time. But we're not going into that. Now, by the time we got to sort of 1990, heading into 1991, the 8-bit home computer market was in quite a state of decline. The 16-bit systems such as the Atari ST and the Commodore Amiga had fallen drastically in price from the levels they were launched at in 1985, where they were the best part of £800 to £1,000 each, and they were now down to sort of the £300-400 mark, which was placing them into the affordable bracket. And the Sega Master System was starting to take off and console gaming was becoming a thing. So the market that was once absolutely dominated by the Spectrum and the Commodore 64 and the Amstrad CPC was dying, basically. It was a gradual death, obviously, but it was accelerating month on month. And obviously these magazines, the publishers wanted to keep them in business because they were still quite profitable for the publishers. These magazines were still, between them, selling well over 100,000 copies a month, across the three titles on the Spectrum. And it became a bragging rights thing who was the best-selling magazine. Now, the cover tapes became integral to this. They became the battleground, really, as the opportunity for exclusives and such started to dry up as less software was produced. So, to get people to buy your magazine, the magazines started putting more software on the cover tapes. Now, it got, it started off in 1990, it wasn't uncommon to see cover tapes from Crash, Sinclair User and Your Sinclair with 3 or 4 items on them by this point, including re-releases of full games which had been sold in previous years at full price and budget price, the aforementioned demos, pokes, and even bits and pieces of software for the Sam Coupe, which was another market that they were trying to appeal to. But as time went on, this fight for market share became more and more intense, and the amount of software on the cover tapes increased. Now, Your Sinclair was doing quite well with its 4-pack cassettes, but even they opted to jump up to a 6-pack and then the Magnificent 7 before eventually settling on a package called the Butte Box. Now, some of these tapes contain some great software. Certainly there was one of the volumes of Your Sinclair's Magnificent 7, which actually featured the full version of the arcade conversion of Rampage as its sort of lead-off title, which was kind of impressive because a lot of the software that did end up on these cover tapes wasn't licenses. It was titles that were developed by publishers as original in-house titles. But here was Rampage, an arcade conversion for free on the front of your magazine. Not wanting to be outdone by Your Sinclair, Sinclair User upped the ante even further. They started doing 6-pack tapes, and then they moved on to an 8-pack, and then a 10-pack. And I have to be honest, the 10-pack was one of the best tapes I ever got because it had both TLL, Tornado Low Level, and Cyclone on there, 2 incredible games which gave me hours upon hours of gameplay. And they peaked with a frankly ridiculous 12-pack. Now, this is the point where ELSPA, the European Leisure Software Publishers Association, got involved because things were getting a bit out of hand with cover tapes. Your Sinclair had its big Magnificent 7s, Sinclair User had gone all the way out to this 12-pack, Crash were doing 4, 5, sometimes 6 titles per power tape, and it just wasn't sustainable at all. It was becoming ridiculous. So a meeting was had and some rules were discussed, and ultimately all the magazines across all the different formats agreed to ramp back what they were putting on the tapes, and they agreed they would only put 2 previously released commercial titles on a tape at a time. Now, obviously the magazines did want to keep the content levels relatively high, so to get round this, they started putting user games on the tape, ones that the readers themselves had coded. Some of these were near commercial quality, some of them, not so much. Sinclair User came up with the great wheeze of the prize game, where the lead title for that particular month, an example of this being the adaptation of the Lone Wolf novels by Joe Deaver, you had to either solve a ridiculously hard puzzle, phone a premium rate phone number, or wait until the next issue to get the code to unlock the game once it had been loaded. This was somewhat controversial and honestly felt a bit cheap because you'd already bought the magazine. You didn't expect to have to pay extra for the software that was already on the cover. Excuse me. But this was the route they went with. This was when YS settled onto the Butte box. Now, ultimately, this was all for nothing really. As I said earlier, the market was already in decline, and as we moved through 1991 into 1992, with the Mega Drive starting to really gain a foothold in the market, the Master System still selling well, the Nintendo NES had a good couple of years off the back of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles craze, and the Super Nintendo was out by this point. The 8-bit home software market just collapsed. The money wasn't there. Now, there are those that will tell you that the reason this happened as rapidly as it did was because of these cover tapes. That's nonsense. The Covertapes and the Covertape War did not kill the 8-bit software market. What killed the 8-bit software market was changing demographics. The gamers that had supported that market through the 80s were now getting older and they were moving on to more advanced systems. The ST, the Amiga, the Mega Drive, the SNES. They were leaving the 8-bit market behind, and the 8-bit market, such as it was left in the hands of their younger siblings and other relatives. And frankly, for the shops, it didn't make much sense to keep selling $2.99, $3.99, $9.99 games, which took up a relatively large amount of space on the shelves, to 10, 11, 12-year-olds who might only be able to buy one or two a month, when they could sell £30 to £40 games to a more affluent, older gamer. And of course, even though these games were more expensive to sell and therefore to stock, the profit margins were higher because there wasn't a huge amount of margin on a $2.99 cassette tape game compared to a $39.99 Mega Drive game. So it was just a natural changing of the guard. Yes, the cover tapes probably did help accelerate that decline to an extent, but not to a level that I would say ultimately caused the collapse entirely. It was just one of a number of factors, and yeah. Now, as a gamer growing up at that time, I didn't see this. To me, it was just brilliant. I could spend £5 or £6 a month, get myself, maybe 8 or 9 full games. Sure, they weren't all brilliant, but I wasn't spending that much on them, and I was getting magazines to read as well. So from my perspective, it was great, and that's probably why the magazines and, to be fair, the market lasted as long as it did. But that's just my thoughts on it. The Covertape Wars, they didn't kill the 8-bit software market, but they were part of why it died. Now, I want to hear what you've got to say. So feel free to comment down below and tell me what you think the effect of the Covertape Wars was on the market. Now, if you really enjoyed this video, do hit that like button. You can also subscribe to the channel and ring the bell to be notified of new uploads. Wow. If you really want to support the channel, you can take out a YouTube membership, join my Patreon, or just make a donation via my Ko-fi page. All the links are down in the description below. Going to give a big shout out to Old Scott Retro and Leftback for their continued support. Much love for you guys. And that's it for this video. I've been Rob. This has been 8/16/32 bits look at the Covertape War. I'll see you on the next video.